The European Green Deal is a major pillar, a major activity of the European Union. It's a huge, huge, huge program, and it is the guiding line to have a European Union, area which is emissions-free by or greenhouse gas emissions-free by 2050. Now, if we listen to industry, this is by far too ambitious. If we see the reality around us, the environment, nature, we all have realized since long that it's by far too slow. It's not going quick enough, and we have to do it different. I do not want to jump more into that, but the European Green Deal is an important part, and the environment and the protection is a huge element when we talk about sustainability. And let me underline that the whole reason why the CLEAR team is organizing this discussion series is to find ways to a really sustainable society, away from consuming and just leaving trash behind, to building, creating, caring, and living together. And with that, may I then hand over to Linus Steinmetz from the Fridays for Future movement. As I said before, he is a very active element in the German movement, but not only, because they are internationally very well networked. So I welcome Linus as well again, and may I hand over to you. The floor is yours, Linus. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very nice introduction. First of all, I will try to keep my input short, as I think that having questions and answering them is the most productive form of discussion. But regarding myself and my role within the Fridays for Future movement, I am responsible for the European cooperation and advocacy of the Fridays for Future movement, and I am a spokesperson, as Günther already mentioned, for the German movement. So we, as Fridays for Future, started out in 2018 after Greta Thunberg started striking in Sweden and protesting what had been a frustration of hers for years. And I myself can relate to that in a very deep way, because I am still at school, I am a young person, and therefore I have witnessed climate politics for the entirety of my life, but I have not seen any incremental change, because the change that we have seen over the last years was always very, very bound in, I would say, like small steps, probably. So that was a fundamental frustration of ours. We, as the Fridays for Future movement, have had incredible success in mobilizing on the streets, and this is where we are, and this is also our political focus. So we are not policy experts, and we are not experts in climate science, and this is something that we also always want to stress. So this is why I'm very happy to have people like Damien, who are actually policy experts. But nonetheless, we pushed for a European solution, for some sort of new European climate policy that was more ambitious and much more daring and courageous than what we had in previous European Council administrations. So, therefore, speaking concretely about the European Green Deal, I think that there's a difference between prior climate policies and the European Green Deal in terms of scope and in terms of ambition. I am actually convinced that, for example, Franz Timmermans is a politician, a decision maker who is genuine in his ambition to improve the climate policies that we are living with today and to contain the climate crisis. Nonetheless, we, of course, as a civil movement and as Fridays for Future, have some criticism regarding the European Green Deal. And for example, we are still saying that the NDCs, so the way that we are actually pursuing our emissions reductions, are not ambitious right now, as of right now. So, for example, we as Fridays for Future are orientating at the Paris climate goals and at especially the 1.5 degree goal. So we do not want any more global warming than 1.5 degrees. This is still physically possible, but the NDCs that we have right now within the European Union are not achieving that goal and are not achieving that goal by far. So this is one of the key problems that we are having. I know that or maybe you also know that there's going to be probably an NDC improvement or increase, so an increase in our ambitions by the European Union still in this year. And we are very, very actively anticipating what is going to be the ambition in that case. But this is one of the points that we are most concerned about. Another is the use of coal and gas that is still being actively subsidized within the European Union. So coal is, in our minds, the energy climate killer #1. And we are very concerned about countries like Poland or Germany, who are either still actively trying to use coal as long as possible, or have end dates for the use of coal, like 2038, which is not compatible with any of our climate ambitions. So we know that the policies that the European Commission is pursuing are rather ambitious, but we also know that if we want to achieve our goals, the member states and the countries need to step up as well. And we think that maybe the administration could, or the European Commission could be more voiced in that sense. So these are some of the main proposals regarding our emissions reductions. We think that 65% or more in emissions reductions until 2030 are necessary. This is not what the European Council or the Commission are pursuing right now. And we would be very interested in hearing what can actually be achieved in that sense. But we also know that we, as the European Union, are not the only ones responsible for climate protection and for containing the climate crisis. So one of the priorities that we have is connecting internationally and looking at the ways in which we can actually, for example, convince the United States if Joe Biden becomes the next US president, but also countries like China, who are huge emitters of carbon dioxide, to increase their NDCs and their goals and their policies as well. And for that, we need a very ambitious European Union. And we are very interested in seeing how the implementation of the European Green Deal further goes. One more thing that should always be mentioned in these kind of legislative processes probably is that we know that the initial process or the initial draft of any legislative thing within the European Union is more ambitious than what we see in the end. And we are very concerned about how the European Council and other member states are going to affect the rather good, I would say, European Green Deal as it stands right now, and whether it is going to be greenwashed in the future or not. So this is the last concern with which I will end, and we are very interesting to hear and to find out in which ways the European Green Deal is actually and finally going to be implemented. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Linus. I would suggest that we continue with our presentation of the speakers and to collect the questions afterwards to have then a good summary. I have already some questions, but I will keep them because they are not only for Linus, but also for the other participants. They are quite basic questions. So the second speaker of our event this afternoon is Tom DeLeo, European Federation of Building and Woodworkers Secretary General. Tom, may I kindly ask you to take the floor?
Yes, thank you, Günther, and thank you, first of all, for the invitation for this event. Glad to be here and glad to be part of this discussion. I really like also the slogan of the clear conferences, how to shape the future. I would maybe immediately say that we would maybe prefer even more if you say how to build the future as a Building and Woodworkers Federation. We are a trade union federation on European level. We have 76 national trade unions, sectoral trade unions, which are affiliated to our organization, coming from 34 countries. And representing more than 2 million workers in our industries. Maybe first of all on the European Green Deal, we have actually from the beginning welcomed this very much. We have always said that we support very much the Paris Agreement to fight climate change. We have been supporting that actually from the beginning, but also the European Green Deal and the ambition to go carbon neutral in 2050. We support that very much as trade union federation. Even more, I would say now in these COVID-19 times, we have been saying that this terrible health crisis, which is now has turned into an economic but also social crisis. We have been saying from the beginning that to get out of this terrible crisis, we need projects such as the European Green Deal to relaunch the European economy. We cannot go back to old business models. So we need to look forward, and this will also make the European continent competitive on a global level. We have actually, together with all our affiliates, we have also adopted 26 demands for the let's say the short-term future, some pressing needs we want to be addressed by governments and at the European level. And in our communication, we are actually focusing on 3 messages, and I want to maybe shortly also present them to you. One is first is health before profit. This is, I think, very clear, and it's more clear now in this COVID-19 crisis. And since the numbers, it looks that that the numbers are going up again of infections. I mean, we need to protect workers and citizens, and also protect them against business interest and short-term profit interest. And we need to be very clear on that. A second one is the economic recovery needs to be based on sustainable jobs. And I will come back to that a little bit later. And a third one, which is extremely important in our, especially in the building industry, is that we want now a better protection for mobile and migrant workers in our industries. We have many mobile workers, people coming from Central and East Europe, or even from outside of the European Union, coming to work in mostly Western European countries such as Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Germany, France, and also the Nordic countries. And in many cases, they are very badly treated, not receiving correct wages, not receiving protective equipment, having to live and work in very precarious situations. I mean, this is also the time to get rid of those, let's say, exploitative business models. What I want to say on the topic also is that, and I think Gunther, you referred to it in the introduction, there was the communication this week of the renovation wave. We have also sent out a press statement that we support very much the proposals and the ideas of the Commission. Actually, we have been also stressing that we would have liked that the Commission was even a bit more ambitious. We don't want to, I think we don't need just to triple the rate, to double the renovation rate of buildings, but we need to triple it. And we would have liked to have seen that actually as one of the prominent ambitions. And I mean, this is extremely important within the European Green Deal package, because buildings represent 40% of CO2 emissions in the EU. So investing in renovation is extremely helpful and extremely important. But also there, I mean, we cannot only look to the ecological goal, but we also need to look at the social goals. I mean, it needs to be at the same time as we put forward ecological ambitions, it needs to be linked with social ambitions. We need to tackle energy poverty. We need also to be very clear that the financial means that will now massively be invested, that they lead to the creation of good jobs, stable jobs, and preferably direct jobs in our industries. This is not just a side effect. This is extremely important. Again, we have now in some member states, in some countries of the EU, we have in our construction industry sometimes half of the workers who are there working under very precarious situations. This is not acceptable. And also what we would like to have seen a bit more stressed in the communication of the Commission is the role of the social partners and the role of social dialogue. I mean, this is part of what we call the famous European social model. We need to be proud of it. And I think it needs to be very clear that in also all of the discussions linked on the recovery strategy, but also all the discussions linked on the renovation wave, on the different initiatives that will come up under the European Green Deal, the European sectoral social partners need to be able to play their role, their active role. Maybe one last point I want to raise here. It is the just transition. I mean, there are very ambitious goals that have been set. Again, we from our trade union movement, we fully support them, but it needs to be linked to a very clear social agenda, what I already said, but also we need to make very operational this idea of a just transition. Because if the transition is not just, if it is not fair, we will lose the support of workers for this ambitious project. We know it is a slogan that has been used by the trade union movement, no jobs on a dead planet. And of course, this is true, but I think we cannot have a sustainable ecological transition if it is not social. So I would like to leave it at this for the introduction. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tom. I think that was an enormously interesting contribution from your side, because it all leads actually to what we would say a normal human behavior, which we should just follow, which means to treat people fair. And I liked very much the sentence, health before profit. But I think it's not only health before profit, it's basically everything else before profit. And profit is something that we need, but profit we cannot eat. Okay, this sounds like we will have a very good question, answer, and discussion afterwards. But before that, we have Damien Meadows, our advisor from the European Commission. And Damien has sent me slides. I will now share them with you. And at the same time, I will hand over to Damien, who will lead us through the view of the European Commission and the activities, and specifically, of course, the Green Deal to us. So I will now put the slides in order. Let me see. That should work here. And here we are. Damien, the floor is yours.
Yes, great. Thanks, Gunther, and thanks, Linus and Tom. Linus, I mean, I agree with you. We should get to the Q&A. That's going to be the more interesting bit. I also agree with you in terms of being afraid of greenwashing. I think there's every reason to be afraid of this, because I started working on climate issues around 20 years ago. Feels like a long time ago now. And I mean, the science has been clear for a long time. I heard reports from the States of a Supreme Court nominee saying, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a scientist either. I'm a lawyer, and I'm terrified as hell of what we're doing in terms of climate change. On my slide, you can see it was Lyndon Johnson telling Congress in 1965 that we've changed the atmosphere. Greta Thunberg, some people try to say she's extreme. She's not. I mean, Jacques Chirac said exactly the same, albeit in French, 18 years ago. Notre maison brûle, il est temps d'ouvrir les yeux. So the science is clear, and it's due to, I guess, politics. It's due to an element of greenwashing. There are reasons why we haven't managed to do what we should be doing. We're facing a far worse future because of it. And I think we can all learn from what's gone right or wrong in the past in order to make sure it happens this time, because we haven't got much time. We need to get to zero emissions by 2030. Maybe in Q&A, if there's questions on the UNFCCC, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, or Kyoto, I'm very happy to talk on that side of things. Europe loved Kyoto, the idea of top-down international binding targets. There's a treaty coming into force on the 31st of December this year, the Doha Amendment, a day before its time period expires. But America's not part of that. If I come to the next slide, Gunther, the Paris Agreement is what we've got. And I like the Paris Agreement in many ways. I mean, it's, I think, a communication success. I think stakeholders, businesses and others, I mean, they're moving forward. But the big downside, and the targets of Paris are right. We should try and limit climate change to 1.5 degrees centigrade. This is a planetary experiment. We do not know what is going to happen. It will be irreversible if we go beyond this. But speaking as a lawyer, the weak point of Paris is the targets. It's based on bottom-up commitments by parties. Europe, I think, is moving to a high level of ambition here. But whether Saudi Arabia, whether India, whether the United States do this is a major concern, because Paris isn't obliging them to do this. So Paris has the right mood music. I mean, it has the right goals, but whether or not we reach the objectives of Paris, we're on track to 3 to 4 degrees warming by the end of this century. So we are very much off track. If I can go to the next slide. So the 2030 climate target plan was mentioned. I would agree with Linus. Everything I've seen of Executive Vice President Timmermans, what I've seen of President von der Leyen, these politicians understand climate change, in my view. I don't want to be on record about what previous politicians may have thought, but I have seen a greater level of interest in how to take this action, how to do this, than I have ever seen before. And that's encouraging, because, like Linus, I've been worried about climate change for a long time. So the commitment now is to reach an economy-wide reduction of at least 55% below 1990 levels by the year 2030, and to have carbon neutrality by 2050. European Council, our heads of state discussed this yesterday. They plan to agree in December on Europe moving up to a 55% reduction. And well, Linus said, I mean, that he's not an expert on the detail of the policies. Normal people shouldn't have to be experts. I mean, they should rely upon governments not trying to trick them, not greenwashing, and doing what's necessary to maintain a habitable Earth. So one aspect maybe we want to talk about is this issue of economy-wide. Kyoto kind of ignored aviation and shipping, and the Commission's been very open that if we take responsibility for aviation and shipping emissions, we make our target 3% more ambitious. For me, every single percentage point is very meaningful. I would also highlight that Paris is explicitly economy-wide. You do get aviation saying we're not part of Paris targets. I consider that categorically untrue in terms of what Paris says. And I think this is a hugely important issue. Europe's taken responsibility for aviation emissions before. Shipping emits more than 150 countries. So kind of somebody should be taking responsibility for this. Public debate. This is key from the Union, and one of them is this consultation. I firmly believe that consultation, interaction, you're going to make better policy than if you get people sat in a room trying to work it out by themselves. So this public debate is beginning. On things like aviation, we have a public consultation on the Commission's website right now for saying, do you think aviation should do more? Do you think it should do less? Please, please, please. I mean, the more people that reply to this, the better, because there's momentum right now, but there's ability for momentum to peter out. And in terms of the process, we have a plan now, but it will take 2 to 3 to 4 years to get the legislation in place. And there's plenty of time in that period when something like, say, coronavirus could distract everyone. And some industries are experts at creating distractions. If I go to the next slide. For my sins, I mean, when I was at university, I wasn't at all a fan of carbon trading. And I've ended up writing the European directive on this and working on the system for a long time. I've become convinced over time because you have to get the prices right. The cartoon from the Washington Post is a bit what I hear from say Airbus with their talk about hydrogen aircraft in 20 years' time, and there was previously talk on electric aircraft. I mean, many wonderful things can be done. Engineers are wonderful, but you need, in a capitalist society, in a market economy, you need to have market incentives to get there. And frankly, if you exempt aviation fuel from all tax, which has been the situation for the last 90 years, then airlines are going to use the cheapest fuel available. So you've got to get the prices right. The quote in italics comes from a United States president. It's not the current president because it's pretty sophisticated, I guess, in terms of his wording. President von der Leyen is much more blunt. She says we must price carbon, all sectors must contribute. But Barack Obama was basically saying that you have to make it more interesting for companies to be cleaner. Unless you do this, you can say what you want, but they're still going to produce pollution. And our economy, we won't get to where we need to. So Europe learned from America here. We've had a carbon price in place. And Linus mentioned in particular coal. And due to a carbon price of 25 euros a ton of carbon dioxide, that's approaching 100 euros for a ton of coal. We had a reduction of by 9% last year alone. I'll say more on the ETS in a moment, but just because it's on this slide, the ETS system, it's done two things. It's avoided carbon leakage. I know that Tom's position paper is very clear, you know, about the cement industry, that we have industry in Europe and we don't just want to move them to Belarus or to North Africa and import cement or clinker. So we've priced carbon for 15 years and we haven't had carbon leakage, our industry moving abroad. Could the money have been used better? I mean, that's a discussion we should have. On the other hand, our member states, they've raised 60 billion euros over the last 10 years. And most of this money is being used by member states to tackle climate change. Because to pay for all the things we need, the money has to. If I go to the next slide, I wish I'd worked more on the renovation wave. I find it really interesting, but as a lawyer and where I've worked in the Commission, I've been involved in other policies. So all these policies should be complementary. And what I've worked on is the carbon pricing, where we've had a market incentive for 10,000 companies, 500 airlines to reduce emissions using the market. We've made it more expensive. And I mean, sometimes from unions, from NGOs, people say, well, you shouldn't allow people to pollute at all. You should just ban it. We do have bans. I've worked on legislative bans, but it's a really complicated world out there. And companies like Arcelor or Lafarge, I mean, they don't spend their time coming to Brussels to tell us the truth. There's massive information asymmetry about what they can do. And in a situation of information asymmetry, basically what we need to do is make it more expensive to pollute and then companies themselves will be reducing their emissions because it makes good business sense. I can say more on ETS in general, but I mean, at the end, we've got a couple of books written on this, so I don't want to go too deep into it. I would spend a word on aviation, particularly in terms of Fridays for the Future, but also sort of building renovation and things like this. Why should electricity, power generation, coal do everything? Because right now, aviation is still exempt from fuel taxes. And the Obama administration spent a lot of diplomatic energy with Hillary Clinton attacking Europe for trying to put a price on aviation emissions. I, for one, will be looking closely at what a Biden administration does. If it's another Trump administration also, I'll be curious, but probably know what's going to happen. But we've had big efforts with airlines saying, look, even Donald Trump, actually, who was fined by the UK under this law for flying within Europe, we've said, you're flying within Europe, you have to comply with our laws. And the position of Lufthansa and others was we shouldn't oblige foreign airlines when flying in Europe to comply with Europe's laws. You would never get this in relation to cement, power plants, things like this. If you want to be part of our market, you comply with Europe's laws. So happy to chat more on that, knowing Gudrun maybe have a special interest in the area. If I go to the next slide, and I think I'm almost through. So, yeah, I mean, in short, and particularly say for Fridays for the Future, because you want climate action, and certainly sort of emissions trading systems could be an excuse for doing nothing. Everyone, please look at the International Civil Aviation Organization. And when you've got a business sector, an industry sector saying it's an inappropriate burden to reduce our emissions below 2020 levels. Yes, I won't say more. But there are people in Brussels, people in all the member states who have tried hard to make carbon pricing a meaningful reality. And part of this is we've set up funds. We've got funds of about 26 billion euros paying for floating wind farms off the coast of Portugal, paying for, in Austria, alpine wind farms, which have to be extra hardy. Also, what Tom mentioned, I mean, you need a just transition. You need to help member states who have other worries, and energy poverty, things like this. You have to help them move forward in terms of the changes. It's very easy for Denmark or the UK or France with a lot of nuclear to say make these reductions. If you're coming from Bulgaria, Romania, there are bigger challenges. So we've had a lot of funds and a lot of solidarity in the system. Without that, you don't have European policies, without an aspect of solidarity. The Green Deal is going to strengthen the ETS. It's going to cover shipping, because, as I said, shipping emits more than 150 countries. Somebody has to take responsibility for some of this. It will improve the emission reduction incentives, and I'm more than happy to talk about where there are shortcomings. It will also look at covering road transport and buildings. And I note that, Tom, your union is skeptical on this. Vice President Timmermans has been very clear that you're entitled to be skeptical. He's skeptical of the benefits of covering road transport himself. And for buildings, for me, the one advantage would be it would raise revenues. And if those revenues were spent right on the renovation wave, on addressing energy poverty, then it could do a lot. But I agree with you, Tom, that price elasticity, buildings aren't necessarily the right objective unless you use the revenue wisely. Also, some business groups pretend carbon pricing is a panacea. I'm so happy that my current bosses agree it isn't. I mean, when I heard Daimler saying 5 years ago we should price carbon from cars, they were saying this because they wanted to stop energy efficiency standards for cars, mandates for electric vehicles. Right now, everyone agrees that you need both, and I think that's very positive. The last point here is energy taxation. I listened to an MEP, a lead MEP in Parliament, saying he likes energy taxation. The problem in Europe is it requires unanimity, though. So that's one reason why I became convinced of emissions trading. With qualified majority voting, you can get a lot further because you don't have a single member state blocking it move forward. And I mean, cynical industries try and get you to choose a path which won't succeed. So for me as a civil servant, my goal is working on policies that can succeed and finding ways through. So I think my last slide, or second to last slide. Yeah, I mean, Linus also mentioned China. And I mean, we've spent 10 years now working with China, trying to convince them of what we've got right, what we've got wrong in Europe. And it's high praise that they have described us as their teachers. Because if it's hard in Europe to put policies into place, it's a hell of a lot harder in China in terms of working with the Ministry of Coal, Ministry of Steel, and so on. So you still have these anachronisms where Xi Jinping says China will be climate neutral by 2060, but you have people busy trying to build coal power stations in Pakistan. And I was asked a couple of days ago, isn't that incoherent? Yes, it's incoherent, but I would love coherency in how governments acted. I mean, I and my colleagues on climate, the smallest DG in the Commission, I think agree with probably most of us in the webinar today. But there are people who have described my colleagues as the Taliban for taking climate seriously. So the two books on here are free to download if anyone's interested to read more. It's a shame we're not meeting in person, but I'm so glad President von der Leyen has actually said coronavirus will have a cure. There will be no cure for climate change. That's why we have to avoid it. And that's the cartoon on this page. As bad as coronavirus is, the effects of unmitigated climate change are going to be far worse. And that keeps me awake at night. And I hope that in the next years we'll be doing what's necessary to avoid the worst. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much. Great. Thank you, Damien. I think this was a fantastic summary of the activities going on. Now, we are perfect in timing, and that allows us actually to start to think about questions and answers. First of all, I would like to open the floor between the panelists. The three of you, if there are any questions that you have one to the others, so that you can come forward and clarify if there's anything that needs to be clarified. And if we can make use of the time to let you clarify your questions and needs, and then we open for the public questions. So who of you has a burning question that needs clarification from another panelist? Linus, please.
Yes, I'd simply be quite interested in hearing your take on this, Damien, because you've also mentioned China and international climate diplomacy at the end. But regarding the European Green Deal concretely or specifically, but also like the political roadmap of the next years, the US election and other things, how do you think we can best affect other countries, and how do you think the European Green Deal can best affect the US and China? Because I haven't heard that much publicly regarding this aspect of the European Green Deal and being the most ambitious like international actor as of right now. So I'd be very interested in hearing what the internal sayings regarding that are within the Commission.
Mm-hmm. Gunther, shall I immediately come in?
Please come in.
So yeah, in terms of the US and China, I mean, two very different countries. China doesn't move overnight, and nor does Europe as a group of 30 countries. So, I mean, we've been working for at least a decade trying to convince China to take serious action. And I mean, it was a lot easier when the US administration was also there wanting China to take serious action. They haven't been historically responsible for most of the climate change. But if they follow the same path as us, then we are screwed. I mean, American per capita emissions are 20 tons per person. Well, in India, they're 2 tons. That used to be China. China is now more per capita than Europe. So I think there's been headway. I mean, Xi Jinping takes climate seriously. And thank God you don't have this Anglo-Saxon climate denial taking root in China. I mean, they know they're in trouble with the Gobi Desert, with desertification, things like this. They are going to have difficult problems. So they've gone up far ahead on renewables. They've gone far ahead on batteries. They know that's the markets of the future. And I think the European experience here, I mean, there are many people in China trying to mirror this, trying to get commercial advantage by being faster for wind and solar. And we are in a race together, and this is good. What we need to do is try to get China to take that economy-wide action and to push others, because the tradition, I guess, in the United Nations is China and India just try to say it's all for you, it's not for me, and they just want to be left alone. They should actually be differentiating between Europe and America and saying, God damn it, America should be doing a lot more. For the United States, it's going to be very interesting what happens. I mean, if anybody wants to Google an article in the New Yorker called Obama's Climate Betrayal, which after 4 years of Trump, I mean, I'd almost forgotten that article. But there are things that Biden could do, such as not standing in the way of Europe acting. I mean, Vice President Timmermans has been clear that he doesn't understand why we don't tax aviation fuel. As a lawyer, I know very well why we don't tax aviation fuel. It's because the airlines have been very busy getting bilateral agreements to say no fuel tax is possible. I mean, if mess. So if the US said to Europe, you can tax aviation fuel if you want, but don't treat United worse than Lufthansa, that would be wonderful from America. Also, I mean, last month, America said you can't include flights within Europe in carbon pricing. That's a public submission from the US mission. And I would love it if Biden would say, look, if Europe wants to put a price on flights within Europe, you're welcome. He doesn't need to get Senate approval to do that. So there's minimum things the states could do. Then, of course, there's a hell of a lot more they could do, such as return to Paris Agreement, such as take congressional action for either renewables, for efficiency standards, for renovation of buildings. A lot of stuff was there in the Waxman-Markey bill 10 years ago, but maybe some of this could be back. And you'd hope people like Rupert Murdoch, I mean, could understand that you're not a socialist to want to avoid climate breakdown. I think Greta Thunberg actually emphasized that last week. It's not about politics. People have been manipulated here. And please, I mean, keep on demonstrating, keep on the pressure. ICAO, the Civil Aviation Organization, shut down in Montreal rather than invite Greta Thunberg inside. They're scared, in my view, of young people because young people don't want climate breakdown. And on the sort of more offensive front here, Europe does talk about border measures. I mean, Macron and France have been keen on border measures for quite a while. This is something that's in Europe's arsenal, that we could impose tariffs on imports. And I think, Tom, your union supports, you know, this level playing field for imports and domestic production. So we're looking at this very seriously. Obviously, it's better if everyone works nicely together. But if they don't, then Europe is a global economic superpower, and it can take stronger action.
Thank you, Damien. I think the subject is quite complex, and 1 hour of discussion is for sure not enough. But to get the flavor, what happened, what can happen, and what is necessary, I think for that our discussion is extremely important and necessary. just, are there any other questions? Tom, would you have a question, or can I open then to the general question and ask Gudrun to take over? Is there any other question between the panelists before I switch over?
Yes, please, if I can, Gunther, and
Please, yes.
Maybe not so much a question, but maybe a remark also to just also the intervention made by Damien. I think it's extremely important that the European Union takes its responsibility on a global scale. And Damien also referred also to some of the positions we have taken as EFBWW. I mean, the EU is an economic superpower, but in the past decades, it was well, almost impossible to speak about, let's say, the role of states, the role of government to regulate economy. Because if you would do that, I mean, Damien, you say that some called you the Taliban within the EU Commission because you fight for climate. But if we, from the trade union side, we have also been accused by many bad words, simply because we were pleading for a level playing field in the EU internal market, where also social rights are protected, where also the rights of workers are protected, not only within the EU, but also on a global level. And we're actually quite, we think it's a quite interesting development that because of COVID, member states and also the European Commission seem to also take a bit of a different geopolitical direction, and do seem to understand that there is a need also to, for example, industrial policy, to invest in that, and to look how we can have a green industry in Europe, and what we need for that. That we do need to regulate imports, for example. I mean, we do have. I mean, Damien, I don't really agree what you said earlier, that there was no carbon leakage in cement, for example. There is carbon leakage at this moment taking place because multinational companies, intra-group, are already dislocating production, the most polluting part of the production, for example, to North Africa and to Ukraine, to Turkey, and even to China. So we do need also to look into what will be the effects of EU policies that now will be put in place, because it cannot be the case, of course, that we go for a carbon neutral EU and just dislocate the pollution to neighboring regions. So we do need an operational instrument, which can be the carbon border adjustment mechanism or the ETS or whatever, but something which can work in practice. And I agree, it needs to be, I mean, we do live and we work in a capitalist environment, so it's about pricing, and it's about pushing the big players, the multinational companies, to respect rules. But I mean, that is also about the EU then taking its responsibility, that when it comes back on the EU market, that we also make sure that the companies outside of the EU have taken their ecological responsibility, but also their social responsibility.
Thank you, Tom. Very interesting. As I said before, we could continue endlessly, but I would like to open now the floor for the audience questions. Gudrun, can I ask you to come in, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Günther. The questions that I have received are quite along the lines of the discussion. So there was one which went like, our house has been on fire for many, many years. So this was already stated not only by Greta Thunberg, but it was already mentioned before. So the question was, who will be the first ones that will actually burn to death? And what do we as a society, and you as maybe, you know, the people, what do we need to do to get through to the ones who just sit comfortably in their climatized rooms and just don't take climate change seriously and don't want to listen? This is to all three of you.
Good.
Shall I jump in?
Yeah, please.
Please
if you have the appetite, please.
So, I mean, in terms of who's first to burn to death, I mean, the problem is that climate is a problem multiplier. So when kids are dying from starvation, when natural disasters are having worse and worse effects, when there's spreads of plenty of tropical diseases. I mean, they're difficult names. I'm not thinking of them right now, but there's deaths happening already. I mean, you look at the West Nile fever spreading up through the US, the various Lyme's disease, things like this, even in wealthy summer camps and things. I mean, there are people dying, and it will get so much worse. I mean, I guess in communication terms, people consider climate change difficult because it's diffuse, and it's difficult to say that person exactly died because of a particular emission. But it's clear that the very rich will probably be able to buy themselves out of much of the damage. But we're in a world of 7 billion, and it's just so deeply unethical to think it's okay to do this. I mean, Pope Francis had a wonderful encyclical on this, and it's just totally unethical. And how to get through to people, I mean, I wish I knew that better. The way I've been in my career working on this is trying sort of to point out we're not communists by taking climate policy. You hear people like Trump saying you can't have efficient buildings because they have tiny windows. In a presentation this week, and I'm sure Tom can say more, I said we're going to have great buildings with big windows. And you have the quote on the Taliban came from the chair of the Parliament's Transport Committee describing the Environment Committee of the European Parliament. You have people trying to divide, trying to make those who are serious about climate marginalized. And in that sense, I guess I personally have tried always to look moderate, even though I see we're doing too little, because we should be panicking on climate change. I mean, it's globally still going in the wrong direction. But how to get through to people, I mean, we can probably pass that to Linus, because the best comment I ever heard for civil servants was governments should get the prices right. Governments shouldn't tell you how to live your life. That should be for social groups, protest groups, churches, things like this. And government's job is to get the prices right, and that's the small area I've been working on. So over to Tom and Linus.
Linus,
Thank you.
Tom?
I maybe, if I may, I can directly add to that, because I agree 100%, Damien, that these are two very specific and very important questions that were being raised. And the one question I think is also very, very much in line with what Tom said earlier, that we need to combine questions of climate and social questions, because the climate crisis is actually sparking on and increasing social disparities that we have all around the world. So we are not just in one crisis, we are right now in multiple crises at once. And this is also why we need to connect social questions with climate policy. And this is why I, for example, very much like the approach of Franz Timmermans to connect these directly by a very diverse range even of policies that he is pursuing with the European Green Deal. So this is the one thing, and I would be very interesting to hear in which ways we can unite as well by Tom. So I think it's very important for both sides of the aisle, for people who are actually challenged by more climate or more radical climate policies. That is a fact, and those of us who want to pursue more radical climate policies, how we can come together and how we can join forces, because at the end of the day, I think around 70% also of emissions around the world are being not caused by individuals and not caused by people who are in socially precarious situations, but by international companies. So these are some of the questions that we should discuss together. But the other thing is how to convince people that we need to act, and we need to act swiftly and radically. And for us with Fridays for Future, we actually had a rather similar approach that Damien described, which is to say clear and loud what is at stake, to give faces to what is actually going on. So, of course, the climate crisis and polar bears, these are very abstract images. So what we did as Fridays for Future is put children and kids on the streets with their faces who said, this is our future, this is our destiny. We are the ones being affected by the things that we are doing right now. So this is what we did regarding the communications part of the problem, to make the problem more concrete, to make it more visible. And the other part that we did is to say, yes, we need pragmatic solutions. Climate shouldn't be a question of ideology. It should be pragmatic search for solutions, which can be radical in any way, but which just need to work in terms of reducing our climate emissions and still keeping our democracy intact. So these are the two main factors that are important to us. And beyond that, there's no ideology for us. So this is our main approach, communications-wise. And I'd be delighted to hear from Tom regarding the questions of social and climate policies interacting with each other.
Can I jump in now, Gunther?
Yes, absolutely, please.
Yeah. No, maybe first of all, I'm sorry, Damien. I didn't agree with one point you mentioned when you said that for the governments, or maybe I misunderstood. It's only about setting the price, and we should leave, let's say, the broader debate to activists and organizations and so on. Actually, what our analysis is that what we have seen in the past 2 or 3 decades is a very fierce neoliberal globalization, which has really cut down many of social protection and many of let's say also the power of the state to regulate. And I think what is really interesting now with this new commission and with also the whole package related to European Green Deal is that it is not afraid to say we want to regulate, and we really welcome that. We really need a European Union that will set the rules, that will decide on the framework, and of course it needs to be just, it needs to be inclusive, it needs to be social, but to set the rules for everyone, clear rules, transparent rules, and I think this is extremely interesting. And of course, I think also what Linus said earlier, and what you also said, Damien. Let's see how now in the usual process of deal making on EU level, what will be the final result, so to say, of all these proposals. But still, I think it looks extremely interesting, the way it is going. So we need this regulatory framework, and this is the role of the European Commission and legislators, and also national, and that is very interesting to see. A second point is that I think what the Commission and governments really also need to understand is that if they want to have supported policies and supported across society, then they should make more use of existing social dialogue structures. We have organized employers and industries in employer federations. We have workers, many workers, member of trade unions, and social dialogue is, and yes, it is old-fashioned, yes, and it is sometimes slow. But if you have social partners agreeing in an industry to go forward, and of course within and together with government bodies and so on, then you have policies which are supported across society. And then you also make policies more, let's say, lobby proof, because what we see too much is that the EU policy making is too much, let's say, vulnerable to lobbyists, and especially to the big lobby groups, which we all know, the big multinational companies and private interests, and this is something that the EU should take more serious. That instead of what they call in nice words a stakeholder approach, I think let's be a bit more old-fashioned in this way, and say that we have sectoral social dialogue committees, and they should play a bigger role.
Thank you, Gudrun.
Yeah, I have one more question, and because I think time is running out, and then one comment. So you talked about the US and China, but there was a question if Europe could lead by example and persuade the developing countries to follow. With that, how do you see that possibility? So not concentrate and focus on the big ones, but try to already help the smaller and developing countries.
That's a question to Damien.
Yeah, shall I come in on that?
Yes,
yeah, please,
Damien.
Yeah, I mean, one of the frustrations of these UN processes is, I mean, I remember one night with somebody saying, how many years are we going to go around saying it's your fault, you do something? We all need to do something because we're heading towards a catastrophe. And this is where countries like Morocco have done a hell of a lot, say, in terms of development of renewables and things like this. They're not the biggest polluter, but you need governments who actually, society who cares about these issues. And yeah, I mean, everyone needs to do more. And Europe, I mean, we can lead by example. To use a bad example, I mean, on aviation, you've had an organization that said nobody should do anything until we get a global agreement of everyone. That is sitting on our hands at a global scale. That's bad. We need action by Europe leading. Tom, I'd be interested to see, or with colleagues, to see the things on the cement industry and stuff, because we want to avoid carbon leakage, this issue of border measures. That's a way of forcing countries. But it's in everyone's self-interest to avoid this. And I apologize, Tom, if I sounded over-interested in price measures. It's because I see sectors of the economy like shipping where there is no price incentive whatsoever. You need both, as I said earlier, regulation and sort of commercial incentives in a market economy. And I see the absence of this, but I didn't mean to come over as neoliberal, except that we need America to do more. I mean, the United States is the absolute elephant in the room in terms of global soft power. And we so need, I guess, if a Biden administration comes in, it to take climate seriously. And that's where I would hope that he's having social dialogue, that he's getting the support of unions to actually do the regulatory stuff, the building codes, the things like this that go well beyond the pricing only model that you have Exxon lobbying for.
Thank you very much, Gudrun. I suggest we take the questions which are still not answered, and we will react to them in a written form, because we really have to come to the end of our session, not to overstress people's availability. Would you agree?
Yes, and I would also include the comments that I have received in the summary.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So with that, may I hand over swiftly to François Ballesteros to come up with the conclusions of our discussions so far. François, please.
Yeah, I come back. Okay.
Welcome back.
Just to look at my notes, because thank you very much for the debate. One thing that we said is that it is a very complex issue, and with multiplier effects, and social and ecology are very linked. Are the goals enough ambitious? Around the table, all of you agreed that the Paris goal is the best at the moment to limit the rise of temperature of 1.5 degrees. However, the reality is a little bit more complex because we need step by step, and let's say the goals of the European Green Deal for 2030 and also for 2050, the carbon neutral, is rather ambitious and supported by many of the people. And we understand here that the role of the Commission is key to let's say, to improve the situation. However, when we see EU, when we speak about the EU, it's not only the Commission. And we see that the member states have a key role here, let's say the Parliament as well, but the Council has a key role. And it's not necessarily as easy as the Commission wish to do. If you take, for instance, the issue that we spoke about, the taxation, you see that the Commission wish to have a taxation which is, let's say, aligned. But the reality is that it's much more complex than this. We spoke about the just transition. I think it is very important that the climate ambitions must be achieved in a way that is fair for the workers. And Tom said that it is very important that the unions participate in the project, but also that the workers, that the unions are consulted in the process, but also that the workers should not suffer loss of pay and working conditions, but also to be skilled and reskilled, because it is something which is important. And he spoke as well about the importance of the investment and the infrastructure policy. This is our, I like what Linus said, it is our destiny, it is our future. This is very, very important, because everything is linked and is part of the democracy. That's why the people should be associated to this process. When we say that carbon pricing does not address all barriers, but everybody should contribute to it. And this is something also which is quite important. Another issue that it takes me very positively is that all policies are concerned and actions required across all sectors of the economy. So we are all concerned. That's why if we carry on doing all of this without changing the way we produce, we will not succeed. So everybody, each company, each sector is concerned to adapt in a smooth or in a rapid way in order that we can achieve the goal. So the EU is responsible to influence the global level, and it's not only at global level, but also internally with it's a key player as well to set up a regulatory framework. I'm looking at my notes. Yes, member states should also have another policy regarding coal and gas policies, because some member states really are behind the others, and we should also have a clear attention to this. Not necessarily only the Commission, of course, but the people and the players. And I think that it's important that we succeed on this. So a lot of challenges, a lot of issues are at stake, and we see that the debate is not at all finished, it's beginning. And the issue of the trade unions, of the youngster to go to the street and so on, and to mobilize is very important in order that the politicians move in their countries and move all together at EU level, at least from our responsibility. This is what I wanted to say, Günther, as a small summary from someone who is not an expert. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francois. I think you have summarized it quite well, and for sure we could continue. What I have to do now is to come to a closure of this meeting. And the most important point of my closure is, first of all, to thank the panelists. You three were absolutely great in our contributions to the discussion. I have already some experience from our previous sessions. When we start the discussion, there is a kind of dynamic which is building up, But today the dynamic was really very, very positive, active, and it gives appetite to continue. We have to say that some questions that we even haven't touched upon was, for example, our mobility issue. Our life, and one part of the Commission's dogma is free mobility and movement of people and goods within the European Union. That's all perfect. But I think there's also a limit on mobility. And probably we will put a light on that in our next session. And this gives me the handover to the next session then, where we plan to discuss a new society. So after thanking again you all three panelists, I have the pleasure to put the light on our discussion on Friday, October 23rd. The title, A New Society, New Thinking, Norms, Behavior, Values, Ethics and Education, from market market-oriented to society-oriented, crisis resilience, and transformation and leadership, what we need to go through all this. Again, enormously interesting. I hope that those people who have attended the session today and the sessions last and the week before will also be able to join us. It starts again at the same time, 1600 next Friday. And with that, I would like to mention just one short sentence that I found when I was in the United States, and I had the chance to be in Arizona and to see the Hopi Indians. It's a verb that I think we all know, and you have heard already before. Once the last tree is chopped, once the last buffalo has been shot, the last fish has been caught, and the last river has been poisoned down, mankind will realize that you cannot eat and live from money. And I think with that, we should take it over to our discussion for next week. I thank you all very, very much.